Go
You
home,
think
old
this
man.
flag defends
Nobody
itself.
here wants your junk.
It's because of
The
men like
words
my
cut through the
son.
crisp autumn air at the
Men
main
like
entrance
him.
of Fort Harrison. William Bill Morgan stood motionless, his weathered hands clutching a carefully folded, triangular American flag against his chest. At 78, his once imposing frame had diminished, but his posture still carried the unmistakable bearing of a Marine. The bronze star with Combat 5 pinned to his simple brown jacket caught the morning light, then disappeared as a cloud passed overhead, much like the recognition he sought. Private First Class Jason 1, barely 22, stood at the gate with his chin lifted in practiced authority. His pristine uniform had never seen combat. His boots had never trudged through foreign soil. Beside him, Private Ryan Martinez shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between his fellow guard and the elderly man before them. "Sir, this is a restricted military facility," Jason continued, not bothering to hide his impatience. "You can't just walk up with some old flag and expect special treatment." A small crowd began to gather. Families arriving for base tours, office personnel on their way to work, a few enlisted men, pausing out of curiosity, their stares pressed into Bill's back like phantom fingers. "My name is William Morgan," Bill said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "I served with 1st Marine Division, 3rd Battalion. This flag, it needs to be where it belongs." Jason glanced at Ryan, a smirk passing between them. Ryan shrugged, then returned to his professional stance. "Look, sir," Jason said, reaching for his radio. "I don't know where you got that stuff, but this isn't the place for whatever you're trying to do." The radio crackled with static as Jason spoke into it. "Main gate to control. We have a situation here. Elderly civilian, possibly confused, requesting entry with personal items. Please advise on removal procedure." The response came almost immediately. "Control to main gate. Is the individual causing a disturbance?" "Negative, but he won't leave." Jason kept his eyes fixed on Bill. Bill felt his legs growing heavier, as if the earth itself were pulling him down. Around him, whispers circulated. A woman in a Navy spouse jacket leaned toward her husband. "Poor man, my father had dementia too. They get fixated on objects from their past." The October wind swept across the parade grounds beyond the gate, carrying the distant sound of a bugle practicing for tomorrow's Veterans Day ceremony. The irony wasn't lost on Bill. He would stand out here unwelcome while inside they prepared to honor men like him. Or perhaps not like him at all. Bill's fingers brushed against the metal on his jacket. Bronze Star with Combat Vi, November 12, 2004, Fallujah, Iraq. The day he had saved 15 men from his platoon and 6 from another unit during an ambush. The day Lieutenant James Sullivan had looked him in the eye and said, "Morgan, you just gave 21 families the chance to see their sons again." Bill slowly lifted his gaze, scanning the faces around him. Young soldiers with expressions ranging from annoyance to amusement. Visitors trying to avoid eye contact. Children pointing openly, unconstrained by adult politeness. In the reflection of the guardhouse window, he caught a glimpse of himself, a stooped figure in dated clothes holding objects everyone present viewed as relics without value. "Sir," Jason's voice sliced through Bill's thoughts, "I need you to leave now." Bill inhaled deeply, a technique he had used countless times when panic threatened during his early years back home. When the sounds of Baghdad traffic became Boston traffic. When fireworks became mortars. When a car backfiring sent him diving for cover in a suburban grocery store parking lot. "I just wanted to leave this in the right hands before I go," Bill murmured, his voice so low that only Jason standing closest could hear it. "I don't have much time left." The words hung in the air like a confession, a farewell, a silent testament from someone who knew his days were numbered and only wanted his most sacred memories to find a place of dignity. Jason frowned, something in the old man's tone making him hesitate. But Ryan nudged him with an elbow, and the moment of humanity vanished. Bill turned and walked away with slow, measured steps. Behind him, the voices resumed their normal cadence. The guards returned to their routine. The visitors continued toward the welcome center. Within minutes, it would be as if William Morgan had never been there at all. The walk home felt endless. Each step on the cracked sidewalk mirrored the fractures Bill felt spreading through whatever remained of his dignity. The flag still pressed against his chest seemed to grow heavier with each block. His modest home appeared on the horizon, a small single story with white siding that needed repainting and a roof that had seen better days. The American flag hanging from the porch flew at half-staff, not by presidential decree, but by Bill's personal choice since Sarah passed 4 years ago. In his heart, it would always be half-staff without her. Once inside, Bill gently placed the triangular flag on the kitchen table beside Sarah's photograph. For an absurd moment, he wished she were there to hold him, to tell him he had done the right thing by trying to honor his fallen brother, the only way he knew how. But Sarah was gone, and with her, the only person in the world who truly understood who William Morgan was. She had carried his nightmares through stormy nights, dried his silent tears on the anniversaries of fallen comrades, never pushed him to speak about the war, but always knew when the memories returned to haunt him. Rusty, his aging golden retriever, limped into the kitchen, his arthritic joints making his approach known before he arrived. Bill reached down to scratch behind the dog's ears. "Just you and me now, old boy," he whispered. "Just us old warriors left." The kitchen remained as Sarah had arranged it 15 years ago. The coffee maker sat ready for tomorrow morning. The mug, a Marine Corps emblem, fading after thousands of washings, waited beside it. The refrigerator held enough food for one person who increasingly forgot to eat regular meals. Bill lowered himself into his recliner and closed his eyes. Outside his window, the world continued spinning, indifferent to the quiet heartbreak of a 78-year-old veteran whose final mission had failed. Inside Fort Harrison, Captain Bradley finished a video conference with Pentagon officials about updated security protocols. Private Jason Wilson and Private Ryan Martinez had returned to their posts at the main gate, the morning incident already fading from memory as they processed visiting family members and contractors. But elsewhere on base, in a spacious office overlooking the parade grounds, Colonel James Sullivan completed his final review of tomorrow's Veterans Day ceremony plans. At 72, Sullivan carried the weight of 5 decades in uniform with practiced ease. His silver hair was cut to the same precise specifications as when he was a lieutenant. The oak desk before him held photographs spanning his career from a young officer in Iraq to his current position as base commander. A knock on his door interrupted his concentration. "Enter," Sullivan called, not looking up from his paperwork. Lieutenant Garcia, his aide, stepped inside. "Sir, the sound system check for tomorrow's ceremony is complete. The speech transcripts have been loaded into the teleprompter and tested." Sullivan nodded. "Good, and the Medal of Honor recipients have all confirmed their attendance." "Yes, sir, their transportation from the airport is arranged for 0800 tomorrow." "Excellent." Sullivan signed the final approval for the ceremony arrangements. "Anything else?" Lieutenant Garcia hesitated. "Just one thing, sir. The caterers need final confirmation on the reception menu." Sullivan waved dismissively. "Whatever they proposed is fine. This isn't my first Veterans Day ceremony, Lieutenant." "Yes, sir. Of course, sir." Garcia turned to leave but paused when Sullivan spoke again. "Actually, Lieutenant, there is one more thing I've been meaning to ask you." "Sir, when you were stationed at Camp Pendleton, did you ever hear anyone mention a Marine named William Morgan? Might have been with 1st Division around 2004. Garcia thought for a moment. "The name doesn't sound familiar, sir. Was he someone important?" Sullivan's expression remained neutral. "Just curious. Thank you, Lieutenant. That will be all." After Garcia departed, Sullivan turned to his computer and logged into the military personnel database. His fingers paused over the keyboard before typing Morgan William J. Several results appeared. Sullivan narrowed the search parameters, USMC Iraq 2004-2005. A single file appeared. Sullivan clicked to open it, scanning through the basic information. Enlisted in 1995, deployed to Kosovo in 1999, Iraq in 2003 and again in 2004. Honorable discharge in 2007. Current status, veteran non-active. Sullivan scrolled further looking for combat citations. When he found what he sought, his breath caught in his throat. Bronze Star with Combat V awarded for actions during Operation Phantom Fury, Fallujah, Iraq. November 12, 2004. Sullivan leaned back in his chair, memories flooding back with visceral intensity. The suffocating heat, the constant tension of urban combat, the ambush that had nearly wiped out his entire platoon until a Marine sergeant from another unit had appeared like a guardian angel drawing enemy fire while the wounded were evacuated. He clicked to open the full citation and began reading, his eyes widening with each paragraph. Sergeant William J. Morgan distinguished himself by extraordinary heroism while serving as squad leader 3rd Platoon Kilo Company, 3rd Battalion 1st Marines during Operation Phantom Fury in Fallujah, Iraq. When informed that a Marine platoon was pinned down by heavy enemy fire, Sergeant Morgan voluntarily led his squad through 6 blocks of enemy-controlled territory to provide assistance. Upon arrival, he found multiple casualties and the remainder of the platoon trapped in exposed positions. With complete disregard for his own safety, Sergeant Morgan moved across open terrain under intense enemy fire to establish a base of fire, allowing the wounded to be evacuated. During this action, his squad suffered 3 casualties, yet he continued to engage multiple enemy positions. When his primary weapon malfunctioned, Sergeant Morgan retrieved a light machine gun from a wounded Marine and continued his one-man assault on enemy positions. His actions directly resulted in the successful evacuation of 15 members of his platoon and 6 members of the pinned-down platoon. Sergeant Morgan's extraordinary courage, decisive actions, and complete dedication to duty reflected great credit upon himself and upheld the highest traditions of the Marine Corps and the United States Naval Service. Sullivan closed his file and stared out his window at the American flag waving in the autumn breeze. "My God," he whispered, "Crazy Bill Morgan." The nickname had emerged in the days following the battle. Sullivan had never seen anyone move with such calculated disregard for his own safety. Morgan hadn't been reckless, that would imply a lack of awareness. No, what made his actions so remarkable was the clear-eyed acceptance of potential death, combined with the determination to succeed regardless. Sullivan reached for his phone, dialing the security office. "This is Colonel Sullivan. I need to know if you had an incident at the main gate this morning involving an elderly veteran." He listened to the response, his jaw tightening. "I see. And did this man identify himself?" Another pause. "William Morgan. Are you absolutely certain that was the name?" Final confirmation. "Thank you. That will be all." Sullivan hung up the phone and sat motionless for several seconds. Then he opened his desk drawer and removed his personal cell phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found the number he sought. He pressed dial and waited. "David? It's Dad. I need a favor and it's urgent. I need you to find someone's address for me." Bill awakened from an unplanned nap, disoriented. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across his living room floor. Rusty lay beside the recliner, his gentle snoring providing the only sound in the quiet house. The television remained off. Bill rarely watched it since the news only seemed to bring stories of a world he no longer recognized. He rose stiffly and made his way to the kitchen for a glass of water. The triangular flag still rested on the table, a silent reminder of his failed mission. Beside it, the letter from Dr. Patterson lay where he had placed it 3 days ago, the official diagnosis outlined in clinical language that somehow made it more devastating: stage 4 pancreatic cancer, metastasized to the liver, estimated 3-6 months. Bill had received the news with the same stoicism he had shown throughout his military career. No outbursts, no desperate bargaining with the universe. Just a nod, a handshake with the doctor, and a quiet walk home with the weight of his mortality pressing down on his shoulders. The diagnosis had sparked an urgency to complete unfinished business. He had made arrangements for Rusty to live with the Johnson family next door. He had updated his will, leaving his modest savings to a Marine scholarship fund, and he had decided it was finally time to fulfill a promise made 20 years ago in the blood-soaked streets of Fallujah. Jake Williams had been the youngest in the platoon, barely 19 when they entered the city. Bright-eyed and earnest, Jake had joined the Marines straight out of high school in Nebraska, carrying the flag his grandfather had received after serving in Korea. "For luck," he had told the others. "Grandpa came home with it. So will I." Jake didn't come home. Neither did the flag until months later when it was sent to Bill, along with Jake's personal effects in a letter, Sergeant Morgan. "If anyone deserves to keep this, it's you." Jake would have wanted the man who tried to save him to have it. "But someday when you're ready, please make sure it ends up somewhere people will remember what it means, what he gave for it, what you all gave." It was signed by Jake's mother. Bill had kept the flag for 20 years through his return to civilian life, through countless moves, through Sarah's cancer and death. And now, facing his own mortality, he had decided the flag needed a proper home, a place where Jake's sacrifice would be remembered. Fort Harrison had seemed the logical choice. A permanent display, perhaps. Something to remind future generations that freedom came at a cost. That behind every folded triangle of fabric was a story of someone who never came home. But he had failed. The young men at the gate couldn't possibly understand the weight of what he carried. How could they? They saw an old man with an old flag, nothing more. Bill returned to his bedroom, opening the closet where Sarah's clothes still hung on one side untouched since her passing. From the back, he retrieved a wooden box with brass hinges. Sitting on the edge of the bed, he opened it carefully. Inside, nestled in velvet lining, lay his service medals, discharge papers, and a small, leather-bound journal he had kept during his deployments. Beneath these, wrapped in acid-free tissue, was a photograph of his platoon taken 2 days before they entered Fallujah. 24 faces stared back at the camera, some smiling, some serious, all alive. Bill knew without counting that only 19 would return home. He traced his finger over Jake's face in the front row. The boy, and he had been just a boy, was grinning broadly, his arm thrown around the shoulders of David Sullivan, the lieutenant's son, who had followed his father into the Marines and into Fallujah. David had survived thanks largely to Bill's actions that day. Jake hadn't. Bill closed the box and returned it to the closet. Tomorrow was another day. Perhaps he would try again, speak to someone higher in the chain of command. Or perhaps he would find another solution. A museum, maybe. Somewhere the flag would be treated with the reverence it deserved. He was making his evening cup of tea when the sound of vehicles approaching caught his attention. Military vehicles, from the distinctive rumble of the engines. Bill moved to the front window, peering out with curiosity. A black SUV with government plates pulled up in front of his house, followed by a Humvee. 4 uniformed Marines emerged from the vehicles, and leading them a silver-haired officer whose bearing triggered an immediate recognition in Bill's mind, despite the decades that had passed. The doorbell rang. Bill straightened his posture, instinctively brushed a hand over his shirt to smooth any wrinkles, and moved to answer. Standing on his porch was Colonel James Sullivan in full-dress uniform, accompanied by a young lieutenant and the 2 guards from the main gate that morning, Private Wilson and Private Martinez. All stood at attention. Bill stared, momentarily speechless. The face had aged, the hair had grayed, the uniform now carried the eagle insignia of a full colonel rather than the single bar of a lieutenant. But it was unmistakably the man Bill had last seen in the chaotic aftermath of the Fallujah ambush. "Morgan," Sullivan said, his voice thick with emotion. "William Morgan." The 2 men locked eyes in a moment that collapsed 20 years into nothing. They were back in that Iraqi street, covered in dust and blood, the sound of gunfire still echoing through damaged buildings. Sullivan stepped forward and executed a formal salute. The other Marines followed suit. "Staff Sergeant William Morgan," Sullivan said formally, "on behalf of the United States Marine Corps and a very grateful nation, I have come to personally apologize for the reception you received this morning." Bill returned the salute, automatically, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought failed him. "Colonel Sullivan," Bill managed, "I didn't expect. How did you find me?" Sullivan's professional demeanor softened slightly. "When these men reported turning away a veteran named William Morgan at the gate, I could hardly believe it could be the same Morgan from Fallujah. But something told me to check, and here you are." Bill nodded slowly. "Here I am." His eyes drifted to the 2 young guards, both now standing rigidly at attention, their faces masks of military discipline tinged with unmistakable shame. "At ease," Sullivan told them, then turned back to Bill. "May we come in? I believe we have much to discuss." Jason Wilson had never felt so small in his entire life. Standing in the modest living room of the man he had dismissed that morning, he struggled to reconcile the elderly figure before him with the war hero Colonel Sullivan had described during their drive over. Sergeant Morgan single-handedly engaged multiple enemy positions, Sullivan had told them in the vehicle. He moved through open ground under constant fire to retrieve wounded Marines. When his rifle jammed, he picked up a fallen M249 and continued advancing. 21 men came home because of what he did that day. Now watching Morgan move slowly around the kitchen preparing coffee for his unexpected guests, Jason saw only an old man with arthritis and a slight limp. How could this be the Marine who had charged into enemy fire with a machine gun? Ryan Martinez stood beside him, equally uncomfortable, but perhaps more perceptive. Ryan noticed the photographs on the wall, Morgan in his dress blues, 20 years younger, but with the same determined eyes. Morgan with his arm around a petite woman with a warm smile, presumably his late wife. And Morgan with his platoon desert camouflage dusty from the Iraqi landscape. Sullivan sat on the couch, declining coffee with a polite wave. "I don't suppose you remember me, Morgan. It was a chaotic day." Bill returned with his own mug, settling into his recliner. "I remember. Lieutenant Sullivan. You were pinned down in that apartment complex on the east side. 6 wounded, no way to evacuate. Sullivan's eyebrows rose in surprise. Your memory's better than mine. I mainly remember thinking we were all going to die until your squad showed up. Bill shrugged modestly. We were in the neighborhood. A ghost of a smile crossed Sullivan's face. 3 blocks away, fighting your own battle, if I recall correctly. We heard the radio call. Bill's eyes grew distant, seeing not the living room, but the smoke-filled streets of Fallujah. No one else was close enough to respond. Sullivan turned to the 2 young Marines standing awkwardly by the door. Private Wilson, Private Martinez. This is what being a Marine actually means. Not standing guard at a gate, not polishing brass for inspection. It means hearing that call and moving toward the danger when everyone else is running away. Both men nodded, their expressions solemn. Bill took a sip of his coffee. You didn't come all this way just to reminisce about old battles, Colonel. No, Sullivan agreed. I came because of the flag, the one you brought to the gate this morning. Bill's eyes flicked toward the kitchen. Jake's flag. I promised his mother I'd find it a proper home. Jake Williams, Sullivan said softly. I remember him. Young kid always had that Nebraska grin. He was with my son David when the ambush started. Bill nodded. He didn't make it. Took a round trying to drag your son to cover. David survived thanks to Jake buying him those few seconds. Sullivan closed his eyes, briefly absorbing the information. I didn't know. David never told me the details. Just that it was betting that you saved them. Not all of them, Bill said, the weight of 20 years evident in his voice. A heavy silence filled the room, broken only when Rusty padded in from the bedroom and settled at Bill's feet with a contented sigh. Jason, unable to contain himself any longer, stepped forward. Sir, I want to apologize for how I treated you this morning. I had no idea who you were or what that flag meant. Bill studied the young Marine for a moment. You did what you thought was your job, son. No apology needed. But, sir, the flag isn't about me, Bill interrupted gently. It's about Jake and all the others who didn't come home. That's what I was trying to explain this morning. Ryan moved forward to stand beside Jason. Sir, if you'd be willing to give us another chance, we'd be honored to help ensure the flag finds its proper place. Sullivan rose from the couch. That's precisely why we're here, Morgan. Tomorrow is Veterans Day. We have a ceremony planned at the base with several Medal of Honor recipients attending. He paused. I'd like you to be our guest of honor, and I'd like to personally accept Jake's flag for permanent display in our headquarters building. Bill stared at Sullivan, clearly caught off guard by the invitation. I'm not looking for recognition, Colonel. I just want to keep my promise to Jake's mother. I understand. This isn't about recognizing you, although God knows you deserve it. This is about honoring Jake and all the others, about making sure new Marines like Wilson and Martinez here understand what came before them. Sullivan's voice grew softer. Please, Bill, let us do this right. Bill looked around the room at Sullivan, at the 2 young Marines standing tall despite their earlier mistake, at the photographs of his own past service at Rusty lying loyally at his feet. Finally, he nodded once decisively. For Jake, he said simply. For Jake, Sullivan echoed, extending his hand. As they shook hands, Bill felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of mission, of purpose, beyond merely existing from one day to the next. Tomorrow he would return to Fort Harrison, not as an unwelcome visitor, but as a respected veteran. He would complete his promise to Jake's mother. And perhaps, in some small way, he would help bridge the gap between his generation of warriors and these young men who had yet to face the true test of combat. Outside Bill's window, the last light of day painted the autumn sky in shades of orange and purple. The American flag on his porch, still at half-staff for Sarah, caught the fading sunlight. Tomorrow, Bill decided he would raise it to full staff again. It seemed fitting somehow. Sullivan checked his watch. We should let you rest. The ceremony begins at 1,000 hours. We'll send a car for you at 800. He paused. Will you bring the flag? Bill nodded. And something else. Something I think Jake would want included. As the Marines prepared to depart, Jason lingered behind momentarily. Sergeant Morgan, he said quietly. My grandfather served in Desert Storm. He never talked much about it, but he had a flag like yours that he kept in a special case. He hesitated. I think I understand a little better now why it meant so much to him. Bill placed a weathered hand on the young Marine's shoulder. When you see him next, ask him about it. Not about the battles. Most of us don't want to revisit those. Ask him about the men he served with. That's the part worth remembering. Jason nodded, his eyes reflecting a new awareness. I will, sir. Thank you. After the Marines departed, Bill returned to his bedroom. From the wooden box in his closet, he removed a small velvet pouch. Inside was his bronze star with Combat V untouched. Since the day he had received it, tomorrow it would accompany Jake's flag to its final home. Bill slept soundly that night without the nightmares that often plagued him. In their place was a dream of Jake Williams, forever young, smiling, that Nebraska grin giving him a thumbs up from across a sun-drenched parade ground. Morgan! Bill awoke with a start, the phantom scream from his dream still echoing in his ears. For a moment, he was disoriented, caught between the burning streets of Fallujah and the cool darkness of his bedroom. His heart hammered against his ribs, and his t-shirt clung to his skin, damp with cold sweat. A glance at the bedside clock showed 4:37 a.m., early but not unusually so for Bill. 2 decades of military service had permanently altered his relationship with sleep. Even now, approaching 80, his body refused to surrender to the luxury of sleeping past dawn. Rusty stirred at the foot of the bed, lifting his graying muzzle in concern. Bill reached out to scratch the old dog's ears. Just the usual, boy, he murmured. Nothing new. But it wasn't entirely true. Last night's dream had been different. Instead of the familiar nightmare of the ambush of Jake bleeding out while Bill tried desperately to stem the flow, he had dreamed of Sullivan. Of the colonel standing in dress blues before a sea of white headstones. Of Jake's flag raised high against a cloudless sky. Of young faces in uniform watching with newfound understanding. Bill rose and made his way to the bathroom, his joints protesting each step. The mirror revealed a face etched with time, deep lines around eyes that had seen too much silver hair where brown had once been skin, weathered by desert sun and northern winters. He barely recognized himself sometimes. The diagnosis lingered at the edges of his consciousness, a shadow he couldn't escape. 3 to 6 months. Perhaps less, the doctor had said, given how long he had ignored the symptoms. The pain in his abdomen was manageable for now, dulled by the prescription bottles lined up precisely on the bathroom shelf. But each day brought a subtle increase, a reminder that the clock was ticking. Today, however, pain would take a back seat. He had a mission to complete. Across town in the officers' quarters at Fort Harrison, Colonel James Sullivan was also awake before dawn. He sat at his desk in the small home office he had maintained through 15 different duty stations, the walls covered with photographs chronicling his rise through the ranks. His dress uniform hung pressed and ready on the closet door, medals and ribbons arranged in perfect order. A framed photograph sat before him, his son David in Marine dress blues, now a major serving at Camp Pendleton. David had followed his father's footsteps into the Corps, had survived Fallujah when so many others hadn't, had built a distinguished career of his own, because of William Morgan. Sullivan picked up his phone and dialed despite the early hour. David had always been an early riser too. Dad. David's voice came through clear, despite the 3,000 miles between Virginia and California. Everything okay? It's not even 5 there. Everything's fine, Sullivan assured him. Just wanted to touch base before today's ceremony. Right, Veterans Day? Big speeches, brass band, the usual. Sullivan paused, choosing his words carefully. I found him, David, William Morgan. Silence stretched across the connection for several seconds. Morgan, the sergeant from Fallujah, the one who... David's voice trailed off. The one who saved you and 20 others. Yes. Another pause. How? Where? He's been living right here in Easton, less than 5 miles from base. All these years. Sullivan shook his head at the irony. He came to the gate yesterday trying to donate a flag. Jake Williams' flag. Jesus. The word came out as a whisper. Jake, I still see his face sometimes. I know, son. Is he okay? Sullivan hesitated. He's facing his final battle. Cancer. He wanted to find a home for Jake's flag before he runs out of time. And some gate guard turned him away. It wasn't a question. David knew the military bureaucracy as well as his father. 2 young Marines who had no idea who he was or what he'd done. I've corrected that misunderstanding. Good. David fell silent again then. Dad, I wish I could be there to thank him in person. I know. I'll tell him you send your regards. More than regards. Tell him, David's voice caught. Tell him I've tried to live a life worthy of what they gave that day. Jake, the others who didn't make it, and what Morgan risked to get the rest of us out. I will, son. I promise. After ending the call, Sullivan opened his laptop and reviewed the changes he had made to the ceremony program last night. Morgan's name had been added to the list of honored guests and a special presentation had been scheduled following the main address. Sullivan had also made another call to General Armstrong at Marine Corps headquarters. The general had listened intently to the story of Sergeant Morgan Jake Williams' flag and the plans for today's ceremony. Make it right, James, Armstrong had said. Too many of them fade away without ever hearing our thanks. Sullivan intended to do exactly that. Private Jason Wilson woke to the insistent buzz of his alarm. 5 a.m. Early even by military standards, but today was no ordinary day. He had volunteered for a special duty, one that might begin to make amends for his colossal mistake. His roommate in the barracks, Ryan Martinez, was already up and adjusting his tie in the small mirror above their shared dresser. Nervous, Ryan asked, catching Jason's reflection. Jason sat up, running a hand through his short hair. A little. You? Ryan nodded. Colonel Sullivan pretty much tore us a new one, and deserved. Yeah. Jason swung his legs over the side of the bed. I keep thinking about what Morgan said about his friend Jake, the flag, and about Morgan charging into enemy fire with a machine gun to save Sullivan's son. Ryan shook his head. Meanwhile, we've been acting like standing gate duty makes us hot shit. Jason stood and reached for his dress uniform. My grandfather would have kicked my ass if he'd seen how I treated Morgan. He was a Desert Storm vet. Never talked about it much, but he always said to respect the old-timers because you never know what they carried. My dad served too, Ryan said quietly. Infantry Iraq 2006 to 2008. He came back different, my mom says. I was too young to remember how he was before. He adjusted his collar. He doesn't come to my graduations or ceremonies. Says the sound of Sousa marches gives him panic attacks. Jason paused one arm in his uniform jacket. I didn't know that. Ryan shrugged. Not something I advertise. Point is, I should have known better too. They finished dressing in silence, each lost in his own thoughts. When they were ready, dress blues, immaculate shoes gleaming, they headed for the motor pool where a staff sergeant waited with the Humvee they would drive to Morgan's house. Looking sharp, Marines, the staff sergeant said, inspecting them briefly. Colonel Sullivan's orders were very specific. You two are to show Sergeant Morgan every courtesy and respect. Is that clear? Yes, Staff Sergeant, they replied in unison. Good, because if I hear otherwise, you'll both be scrubbing latrines with your toothbrushes until retirement. He tossed Jason the keys. Now move out. You're expected at Sergeant Morgan's residence at 0800 sharp. Bill finished his second cup of coffee as the morning news played quietly on the small television in the kitchen. The anchor was discussing the Veterans Day celebrations planned across the country. Different war, different time, Bill thought, but the same cost, the same sacrifices, the same struggle to return to a world that could never understand what happened over there. He turned off the TV and moved to the bedroom to dress. Sarah had always laid out his clothes on special occasions, a habit from their early marriage that had continued until her final days. Now he selected each item himself with deliberate care, his best slacks pressed the night before, a light blue button-down shirt that Sarah had always said brought out his eyes, the navy blazer he had worn to their 45th anniversary dinner, the last one before her diagnosis. The bronze star with Combat V was the final touch pinned to the blazer's lapel with precision. Bill studied himself in the full-length mirror on the closet door. Not quite military inspection, ready but dignified. Appropriate for the occasion. From the closet shelf, he retrieved the wooden box and carefully removed Jake's flag. The triangle of fabric was still crisp despite its age, the stars bright against the deep blue field. Bill had stored it properly, protecting it from light and moisture, as if it were a sacred artifact. In many ways it was. The clock on the bedside table read 7:45. The Marines would arrive soon. Bill made one final check of the house coffee maker, unplugged Rusty's food and water bowls filled back door locked. Force of habit made him leave a lamp on in the living room, though he expected to return before dark. Sarah's photograph on the mantel caught his eye as he walked through the living room. He paused, touching the silver frame gently. Wish you were here for this, sweetheart, he said softly. You always said Jake's flag needed a proper home. Today it finds one. The rumble of military vehicles approaching pulled Bill back to the present. He straightened his posture, squared his shoulders, and moved to the front door, flag cradled carefully in his arms. Jason guided the Humvee to a stop in front of Morgan's modest home, Ryan in the passenger seat beside him. Both had been mostly silent during the drive, the weight of the day's significance heavy on their young shoulders. "This is it," Jason said, unnecessarily putting the vehicle in park. Ryan nodded, scanning the small house. An American flag flew at half-staff from a pole mounted by the front porch. The yard was neat but simple, a few late-season mums adding color along the walkway. Everything about the place spoke of careful maintenance with limited resources. "You ready for this?" Ryan asked. Jason took a deep breath. "Not really, but that's not the point, is it?" They exited the Humvee in unison, adjusting their covers and straightening their jackets. As they approached the front door, it opened, revealing William Morgan in his blazer and slacks, the Bronze Star prominent on his lapel. In his arms, he held the triangular flag with a reverence that made both young Marines stand a little straighter. "Good morning, Sergeant Morgan," Jason said formally. "Colonel Sullivan sent us to escort you to the base for the Veterans Day ceremony." Morgan nodded once. "Right on time. Good to see punctuality hasn't gone out of style in the Corps." Ryan stepped forward. "May we help you with anything, sir? Any bags or items you need to bring?" "Just this," Morgan indicated the flag. "And one other thing. Wait here a moment." He disappeared back into the house, returning moments later with a small velvet pouch. "All set," Morgan said, pulling the door closed behind him and locking it. The three men walked to the Humvee, Jason moving ahead to open the passenger door. Morgan paused before entering the vehicle, glancing back at his house with an expression the young Marines couldn't quite interpret, something between farewell and resolve. Then he climbed in, settling the flag carefully on his lap, and they were underway. The drive to Fort Harrison took just under 20 minutes. Jason maintained a respectful silence, focusing on the road while Ryan occasionally glanced at their passenger in the rearview mirror. Morgan sat straight and still, his eyes taking in the passing scenery with quiet attention. As they approached the main gate, the same gate where Morgan had been turned away just yesterday, the guard recognized the Humvee and waved them through without stopping. Inside the base, autumn bare trees lined the wide avenues, and buildings dating back to the 1940s stood in orderly rows. A large parade ground formed the heart of the installation, now set up with rows of chairs and a raised platform draped in red, white, and blue bunting. Jason parked in a reserved space near the base headquarters building. As the engine fell silent, Ryan turned in his seat. "Sergeant Morgan, Colonel Sullivan asked us to bring you to his office before the ceremony begins. He wanted to speak with you privately." Morgan nodded. "Lead the way." The three men entered the headquarters building, drawing attention as they passed through the lobby. Word had apparently spread about the special guest attending today's ceremony. Junior officers and enlisted personnel alike paused in their duties to watch the elderly veteran walk by, many coming to attention without being prompted. An aide was waiting outside Sullivan's office. "Sergeant Morgan, Colonel Sullivan is expecting you. Private Wilson and Private Martinez, you're to wait here." Jason and Ryan came to attention. "Yes, ma'am." The aide knocked once on Sullivan's door, then opened it. "Sergeant William Morgan, sir." Sullivan rose from behind his desk as Morgan entered. The two men regarded each other for a moment, the weight of shared history palpable in the air between them. "Thank you for coming, Morgan," Sullivan said, extending his hand. Morgan shifted the flag to his left arm and shook Sullivan's hand firmly. "Appreciate the invitation, Colonel. Though I have to say it's all a bit more than I expected. I just wanted to find a good home for Jake's flag." "And you will." Sullivan gestured to a sitting area in the corner of his spacious office. "Please have a seat. We have about 30 minutes before the ceremony begins." Morgan settled into an armchair, placing the flag carefully on his knees. Sullivan took the chair opposite, leaning forward slightly. "I spoke with my son, David, this morning," Sullivan began. "He's stationed at Camp Pendleton now, a major." Morgan's expression softened. "Good for him. He was a fine Marine even as a young lieutenant. He wanted me to tell you something." Sullivan paused, collecting himself. "He said to tell you that he's tried to live a life worthy of what Jake and the others gave that day, and what you risked to get the rest of them out." Morgan looked down at the flag, his weathered fingers tracing the edge of the fabric. "He doesn't owe me anything. None of you do." "That's where you're wrong, Bill." Sullivan rarely used first names in uniform, but this moment seemed to call for it. 21 men came home because of what you did. Those 21 men went on to live full lives, to have families, to contribute to the world. My son among them. Morgan remained silent, his expression unreadable. Sullivan continued, David told me once that he remembers every detail of that day. The heat, the dust, the sound of the RPG that hit the building next to them. And he remembers you appearing like some avenging angel laying down covering fire while the corpsmen evacuated the wounded. A ghost of a smile crossed Morgan's face. Avenging angel? Hardly. I was just doing my job. We both know it was more than that. Sullivan reached for a folder on the coffee table between them. I pulled your service record yesterday. Distinguished service in Kosovo, 2 tours in Iraq, Bronze Star with Combat 5, Navy Commendation Medal, Combat Action Ribbon, an exemplary career. Just a Marine colonel like thousands of others. Sullivan closed the folder. What happened when you left the Corps? Morgan shrugged slightly. Came back stateside, worked as an auto mechanic in Boston for a while, met Sarah, got married, moved around a bit before settling here. Nothing special. And the flag, Jake's flag, Morgan's fingers continued their gentle path along the flag's edge. His mother sent it to me after the funeral. Said Jake would want me to have it, but I always knew it wasn't mine to keep forever. Just to guard for a while. Sullivan nodded, understanding. And now I'm running out of time. Morgan stated it simply without self-pity. Got the diagnosis 3 weeks ago. Pancreatic cancer, spread to the liver. Sullivan's expression darkened. I'm sorry, Bill. Don't be. I've had a good run. Longer than Jake. Longer than a lot of the men I served with. Morgan straightened in his chair. But I need to know Jake's flag will be properly honored, that people will understand what it means. They will, Sullivan promised. After today, everyone on this base will know Jake Williams' name. And yours. Morgan shook his head. This isn't about me. No, but it should be. Sullivan checked his watch. We should head to the parade ground. The ceremony will begin soon. He hesitated. There's something else I wanted to tell you. I've arranged for a display case in the headquarters lobby. Jake's flag will have a place of honor with a plaque explaining its significance. That's all I wanted, Morgan said softly. Thank you. As they rose to leave, Sullivan noticed the small velvet pouch Morgan had set on the table. What's that? Morgan picked it up, hesitating before opening the drawstring. Inside was his Bronze Star medal. Thought it should stay with Jake's flag. They're part of the same story. Sullivan stared at the medal, then at Morgan, understanding dawning in his eyes. Yes, they are. Jason and Ryan stood at attention as Morgan and Sullivan emerged from the office. Both colonels and privates had joined them in the hallway, word having spread rapidly about the special visitor. Wilson Martinez, Sullivan addressed them. You will escort Sergeant Morgan to the parade ground and ensure he is seated in the reserve section front row. Is that clear? Yes, sir, they responded in unison. Morgan followed the young Marines through the building and outside. The November morning was crisp but clear, the sun bright in a cloudless sky. The parade ground, usually empty except during ceremonies or drills, was now filled with hundreds of chairs arranged in neat rows. A stage had been erected at one end, decorated with patriotic bunting and flanked by flags. A Marine Corps band was setting up to one side. Base personnel and visitors were already finding their seats. Many were in uniform, active duty, Marines representatives from other branches, and veterans in varying states of formality, from dress uniforms to simple blazers with service caps. Families with children, local dignitaries, and community members rounded out the gathering. Jason and Ryan led Morgan to the front row, where a chair had been labeled with his name. Beside it were seats reserved for Medal of Honor recipients and distinguished visitors. Sergeant Morgan, Ryan said, we'll be standing just behind you throughout the ceremony. If you need anything at all, please let us know. Morgan nodded, settling into his seat with the flag still cradled in his arms. Around him, other veterans were being escorted to their places, many glancing curiously at the elderly Marine holding the carefully folded triangle of fabric. A staff sergeant approached, leaning down to speak quietly. Sergeant Morgan, Colonel Sullivan asked me to inform you that you'll be called to the stage during the ceremony. He'll explain everything when the time comes. Morgan's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded again. Understood. The band began playing patriotic selections as the remaining seats filled. At precisely 10 IAM, the base commander, a brigadier general whose name Morgan didn't catch, took the stage to welcome everyone to the Veterans Day ceremony. The proceedings followed the traditional format, an invocation by the base chaplain, the national anthem, remarks from the general about the significance of Veterans Day. Morgan listened respectfully, his mind occasionally drifting to other ceremonies, other parades, other times when the nation had paused to honor its service members. Then Sullivan was at the podium, his silver hair catching the sunlight, his voice carrying clearly across the parade ground. "Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, fellow Marines," Sullivan began. "Veterans Day is a time to honor all who have served our nation in uniform. But today I want to tell you a story about one Marine in particular, a Marine whose actions exemplify the highest traditions of our Corps, but whose name you likely don't know." Morgan felt a sudden tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with his illness. Sullivan was looking directly at him now. In November 2004, during Operation Phantom Fury in Fallujah, Iraq, a Marine platoon was pinned down by enemy fire. 3 men were dead, 6 wounded, and the rest trapped in exposed positions with ammunition running low. "I know because I was there leading that platoon." A murmur ran through the audience. "We had called for help, but the fighting was intense throughout the city. No one expected a response. But one came." Sullivan paused. "Staff Sergeant William Morgan, hearing our distress call, led his squad through 6 blocks of enemy territory to reach our position. Upon arrival, finding the situation dire, he did something extraordinary." Morgan's grip on the flag tightened. This wasn't what he had come for today. He had wanted a quiet handover, a dignified display for Jake's flag. Not this public recounting. Sullivan continued, his voice steady but emotional. With complete disregard for his own safety, Sergeant Morgan moved across open ground under heavy enemy fire. He established a base of fire that allowed our wounded to be evacuated. When his squad took casualties, he continued alone. When his rifle malfunctioned, he picked up a fallen M249 machine gun and pressed forward. The audience was completely silent now, all eyes shifting between Sullivan and the elderly Marine in the front row. 21 men survived that day because of William Morgan's courage, my son David among them. Sullivan's voice caught slightly, but 5 did not, including a young Marine named Jake Williams who died protecting my son. Sullivan gestured toward Morgan. "Sergeant William Morgan is with us today. He came to Fort Harrison yesterday carrying a flag, the flag that had been presented to Jake Williams's family and later given to Morgan by Jake's mother in recognition of his attempt to save her son." Morgan felt rather than saw every eye in the gathering turned toward him. "Sergeant Morgan," Sullivan said formally, "would you please join me on the stage?" For a moment, Morgan wasn't sure his legs would support him, but they did as they always had when duty called. He rose slowly, flag held carefully before him, and made his way to the steps at the side of the stage. Jason and Ryan flanked him, though they didn't touch him, understanding instinctively that the old warrior would want to climb those steps under his own power. Once on stage, Morgan stood at attention beside Sullivan, the flag still cradled in his arms. Sullivan addressed the audience again. "Sergeant Morgan came to our gate yesterday hoping to donate this flag for proper display to fulfill a promise made to Jake's mother 20 years ago. Due to a misunderstanding, he was turned away." A ripple of discomfort passed through the crowd. "That error has been corrected," Sullivan continued. "Today, we not only accept Jake's flag for permanent display in our headquarters building, but also recognize the extraordinary Marine who has been its guardian for 2 decades. Sullivan turned to face Morgan directly. "Sergeant William Morgan, on behalf of the United States Marine Corps, I thank you for your service, your sacrifice, and your unwavering commitment to honoring your fallen comrade." Morgan swallowed hard emotion, threatening to break through his carefully maintained composure. He hadn't expected this, hadn't wanted it. But standing here now, he felt something long buried beginning to stir, a sense of being truly seen, of his service and Jake's sacrifice being acknowledged. Sullivan extended his hands. "May I accept Jake's flag on behalf of the Corps?" Morgan looked down at the triangle of fabric that had been his charge for so long. With careful movements, he placed it in Sullivan's waiting hands. "Thank you, sir," Morgan said, his voice low but steady. "Please ensure it's displayed with the respect it deserves." "You have my word," Sullivan promised, holding the flag with the same reverence Morgan had shown. What happened next caught Morgan completely by surprise. Sullivan handed the flag to an aide, then turned back to Morgan. Attention to orders, Sullivan called out, his voice shifting to the formal cadence of a military ceremony. The entire assembly seemed to come to attention as one. The President of the United States, acting upon the recommendation of the Commandant of the Marine Corps, has placed special trust and confidence in the man of patriotism, integrity, and abilities of Staff Sergeant William J. Morgan, United States Marine Corps, retired. Morgan's eyes widened. This wasn't part of the plan. This wasn't why he had come. Sullivan continued. In recognition of his extraordinary heroism while serving as squad leader 3rd Platoon Kilo Company 3rd Battalion 1st Marines during Operation Phantom Fury in Fallujah, Iraq, Staff Sergeant Morgan is hereby advanced to the rank of Gunnery Sergeant on the retired list, effective immediately. A Marine officer stepped forward holding a small box. Sullivan opened it, revealing the insignia of a Gunnery Sergeant. This advancement acknowledges the true level of responsibility and leadership demonstrated by then Staff Sergeant Morgan during combat operations, and corrects an administrative oversight in his service record. Morgan stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. Promotion on the retired list was rare, reserved for those whose actions had been deemed worthy of special recognition, but who, for various reasons, had not received it while on active duty. Gunnery Sergeant Morgan, Sullivan said, pinning the new rank insignia to Morgan's blazer beside the Bronze Star. The Corps does not forget its heroes, even if it sometimes takes us too long to properly honor them. The parade ground erupted in applause, Marines and civilians alike rising to their feet. Morgan managed to maintain his composure, though his eyes burned with unshed tears. This wasn't what he had come for, but he would not dishonor the moment with protest. When the applause finally subsided, Sullivan spoke again. Gunnery Sergeant Morgan has one more item to contribute to our display. He gestured, and the aide stepped forward with the velvet pouch. Sullivan opened it, revealing the Bronze Star with Combat V. This medal, earned through extraordinary courage under fire, will be displayed alongside Jake's flag, telling the complete story of that day in Fallujah and the Marines who served with such distinction. Morgan finally found his voice. "If I may, Colonel." Sullivan nodded, stepping aside to allow Morgan access to the microphone. Morgan surveyed the audience, hundreds of faces looking back at him with respect and admiration. It was so far from what he had experienced yesterday at the gate, from what he had expected from this day. "I'm not much for speeches," Morgan began, his voice gaining strength as he continued. "But there's something that needs saying. This isn't about me. It never was." He gestured toward Jake's flag, now held reverently by the aide. "That flag represents Jake Williams, a 19-year-old from Nebraska who had his whole life ahead of him. It represents every Marine who didn't come home, every family that received a folded triangle instead of a living, breathing son or daughter." Morgan paused, scanning the crowd. "I see a lot of young faces out there, Marines who haven't yet faced combat, who haven't yet learned what it means to put everything on the line for the Marine beside you." His eyes found Jason and Ryan standing at attention near the front. "When that day comes, and for many of you it will remember this, no one does it for the medals. No one does it for the recognition. You do it because the Marine next to you would do the same for you, because that's what being a Marine means." Morgan looked down at the new rank insignia on his blazer, then back at the audience. "I accept this honor on behalf of Jake Williams and every Marine who didn't come home to receive the recognition they deserved. Their sacrifice was greater than mine." He stepped back from the microphone, coming to attention and rendering a salute that would have made his drill instructor proud even all these decades later. The ceremony concluded with the Marine Corps hymn played by the band as Sullivan escorted Morgan back to his seat. The remainder of the event passed in something of a blur for Morgan. More speeches, a wreath laying, the traditional rifle salute. As the crowd began to disperse following the closing benediction, Morgan found himself surrounded by Marines of all ranks, many waiting patiently for a chance to shake his hand or simply offer a respectful nod. Veterans from other conflicts approached as well, the unspoken brotherhood of those who had faced combat, creating an instant connection across generations. Jason and Ryan remained nearby, ensuring no one overwhelmed the elderly Marine, but allowing the spontaneous reception to continue. Sullivan stood a few paces away, watching with evident satisfaction as Morgan received the recognition he had deserved for so long. A Marine staff photographer captured the moment when 3 generations of Marines stood together, Morgan, a veteran in his 70s, and Jason representing the newest generation of the Corps. The photograph would later hang in the headquarters building beside the display case containing Jake's flag and Morgan's Bronze Star. As the impromptu gathering finally began to thin, Sullivan approached Morgan again. "There's one more person who wants to meet you, Bill. Someone who's come a long way." Morgan, exhausted but fulfilled in a way he hadn't expected, looked up questioningly. Sullivan gestured toward a tall Marine officer standing a few yards away, waiting respectfully. The man wore the gold oak leaves of a major on his uniform. "David," Morgan's voice was barely audible. Major David Sullivan stepped forward, coming to attention and rendering a perfect salute. "Gunnery Sergeant Morgan, it's an honor to finally thank you in person." Morgan returned the salute automatically, then found himself enveloped in a heartfelt embrace as David abandoned military protocol. "I took an emergency leave," David explained as he stepped back. "When Dad called, I knew I had to be here. To see you, to thank you." Morgan shook his head momentarily, unable to speak. Finally, he managed, "You shouldn't have gone to the trouble. You have duties, responsibilities." David smiled, a flash of his father visible in the expression. "Nothing more important than this, Gunny. Nothing more important than finally meeting the man who gave me the chance to have a life, a career, a family." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a photograph, offering it to Morgan. It showed David with a woman and two teenage children, all smiling against the backdrop of the California coast. "My wife Elizabeth, our kids Jake and Sarah." Morgan's head snapped up at the names, his eyes questioning. David nodded. "Jake for Jake Williams. Sarah." He hesitated. "Dad mentioned that was your wife's name. I hope you don't mind. It seemed fitting." Morgan stared at the photograph, then at the man before him, the young lieutenant from Fallujah, now grown into middle age, a Marine officer with a family of his own, a life that might never have happened without that day in Fallujah, without Jake's sacrifice, without Morgan's decision to answer that distress call. "I don't mind at all," Morgan said, finally, his voice rough with emotion. "I think Sarah would have been honored, and I know Jake would be proud." The three men stood together on the emptying parade ground, the aging colonel, his officer's son, and the newly promoted gunnery sergeant whose courage had connected their lives forever. Behind them, the headquarters building stood solid and permanent, soon to house a display that would ensure Jake Williams and William Morgan would be remembered long after they were gone. As they turned to walk toward the building, Morgan felt a weight lifting, not just the physical burden of Jake's flag now in the proper hands at last, but something deeper. A weight he had carried for 20 years without fully recognizing it. The weight of a promise kept in silence, of valor unacknowledged, of sacrifice remembered only in private moments. The autumn sun cast their shadows long across the parade ground. Ahead of them, the future. Behind a past, finally at peace. The display case in the Fort Harrison headquarters lobby was crafted from polished oak and museum-grade glass, designed to preserve its contents for decades to come. Inside, Jake Williams' flag formed a perfect triangle at the center, flanked by William Morgan's Bronze Star with Combat 5. A brass plaque beneath them told the story in simple, powerful terms. In honor of Lance Corporal Jake Williams, USMC, 1985-2004, who gave his life protecting his fellow Marines during Operation Phantom Fury, Fallujah, Iraq, and Gunnery Sergeant William J. Morgan, USMC retired, who saved 21 Marines that day at a great personal risk. Semper Fidelis, always faithful. Morgan stood before the display, his reflection faint in the protective glass. The afternoon reception following the Veterans Day ceremony had finally concluded, allowing him a quiet moment alone with Jake's flag in its new home. His weathered fingers touched the glass briefly, a final farewell to a responsibility carried for 20 years. "It looks right," came a voice from behind him. Morgan turned to find Jason Wilson standing a respectful distance away, his dress uniform still immaculate despite the long day. "It does," Morgan agreed, turning back to the display. "Jake would approve." Jason moved to stand beside the older Marine, both men silent for a moment as they regarded the memorial. "Gunny," Jason said, finally using Morgan's new rank, "I wanted to say something more about yesterday, about how I treated you at the gate." Morgan shook his head. "We've been through all that, son. No need to keep revisiting it." "Maybe not for you," Jason persisted, "but for me, I need you to understand something. My grandfather was a Marine, served in Desert Storm. Growing up, he was my hero." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "After the ceremony today, I called him. First time in months, to be honest. Morgan turned his attention from the display to the young Marine, noting the emotion just beneath the professional surface. I told him about you, Jason continued, about what happened at the gate, about your story. And, Morgan prompted when Jason fell silent. He wasn't surprised. Said the same thing almost happened to him once. Said there's always been a disconnect between the generations, especially in the Corps. The ones who've seen combat and the ones who haven't yet. Morgan nodded slowly. It was true enough. The gap between those who had faced enemy fire and those who had not was often wider than the gap between military and civilian life. Your grandfather sounds like a wise man, he said. He is. And he said something else. He said to tell you that men like you, men who did what needed doing without expectation of recognition, you're the real heart of the Corps, the ones who uphold the tradition even when no one's watching. Morgan glanced back at the display weeks at Jake's flag and his own medal. Not entirely without recognition anymore, it seems. No, sir, Jason agreed. Not anymore. They stood in companionable silence for another minute before Jason spoke again. Colonel Sullivan asked me to let you know the car is ready whenever you'd like to return home. Morgan nodded. I'm ready. As they walked toward the building's entrance, Morgan felt a curious lightness. The mission was complete. Jake's flag was home, his promise fulfilled. Whatever time remained to him would be unburdened by that particular obligation. The black SUV that had brought Morgan to the base waited at the curb, Ryan Martinez standing beside it at parade rest. He came to attention as Morgan approached. Gunny, Ryan greeted him. Ready to head out? Yes, Morgan said, then hesitated. Though there is one more stop I'd like to make if possible. Jason and Ryan exchanged glances. Of course, sir, Jason said. Wherever you need to go. The drive to East Lawn Cemetery took only 15 minutes. Morgan directed them to a particular section near an ancient oak tree where simple headstones stood in orderly rows. Ryan pulled the SUV to a gentle stop along the narrow cemetery road. Would you like us to accompany you, Gunny? Ryan asked. Morgan shook his head. No, son, this is a private conversation. I won't be long. He made his way slowly among the headstones until he reached one bearing the name Sarah Elizabeth Morgan, beloved wife, 1946-2020. The polished granite was simple but dignified, much like the woman it commemorated. Morgan stood straight despite the fatigue of the long day, addressing the headstone as if Sarah could hear him. It's done, sweetheart, he said softly. Jake's flag has a proper home now, a place where people will see it and remember, know what it cost. The autumn breeze stirred the few remaining leaves on the oak tree, sending them dancing across the cemetery grounds. You would have enjoyed today, Morgan continued, all the fuss they made, me in the spotlight. You always said Jake's flag deserved proper recognition. He smiled faintly. And they promoted me. Gunnery Sergeant now, if you can believe it. 20 years after the fact. He reached into his pocket and withdrew his challenge coin, running his thumb over the embossed Marine Corps emblem. I think I'm ready now, Sarah. Ready for whatever comes next. The mission's complete. Morgan placed the challenge coin atop Sarah's headstone, a Marine's tribute to the woman who had shared his life for 47 years. I'll see you soon, he promised quietly. Not too soon, I hope. Still have a few things to take care of, but when the time comes, save a spot for me. With a final touch to the cool granite, Morgan turned and made his way back to the waiting SUV. Jason and Ryan stood beside it, maintaining a respectful distance while keeping a watchful eye on the elderly Marine. They had removed their covers, holding them against their chests in silent acknowledgement of the sacred ground. Morgan appreciated the gesture, a small but significant indication that these young men were beginning to understand what truly mattered. The following weeks brought unexpected changes to Morgan's quiet life. Colonel Sullivan had arranged for a military medical team to review his case, resulting in access to an experimental treatment program at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. Morgan had initially resisted, no sense wasting resources on an old Marine when there are younger ones who need it more. But Sullivan had been insistent. You're not just any old Marine, Sullivan had said, and this isn't charity. The doctors are genuinely interested in your case. Something about your overall health despite the advanced cancer. They think they might learn something that could help others. Put that way, Morgan couldn't refuse. If his situation could somehow benefit other Marines, other service members, then he had a duty to cooperate. The treatments were grueling, but Morgan approached them with the same determination he had once applied to combat operations one day at a time, one objective at a time. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, using terms like notable response and better than expected outcomes. Morgan took their clinical optimism with a grain of salt. He had made his peace with the diagnosis. Additional time would be welcome but not essential. What mattered was how that time was used. Between treatments, Morgan found himself with an unexpected new mission. Word of his story had spread throughout the base, then to other installations, and finally to Marine Corps headquarters itself. The commandant had personally called, expressing both regret for Morgan's experience at the gate and appreciation for his lifetime of service. "Your story highlights something we need to address Corps-wide," the commandant had said, "the disconnection between our combat veterans and our newer Marines. Would you be willing to help us bridge that gap?" And so on the days when his strength permitted, Morgan found himself speaking to groups of young Marines about his experiences, not dwelling on combat details or war stories, but on the bigger picture, what it meant to serve, to sacrifice, to uphold the Corps' values when no one was watching. Jason and Ryan had become his unofficial aides during these sessions, ensuring he had water, a chair when needed, and transportation to and from the base. Their own perspectives had evolved dramatically since that first encounter at the gate, and they often contributed their insights to the discussions. "I used to think being a Marine was about the uniform, the discipline, the technical skills," Jason admitted to one group. "Meeting Gunny Morgan showed me it's about something much deeper, a commitment that doesn't end with active service." Ryan added his own perspective. "My father served in Iraq too, came back different. I never really understood until I heard Gunny Morgan speak about Jake Williams, about keeping promises, about honoring those who didn't come home. Now I'm starting to get what my father carries." Morgan took pride in these moments, seeing the gradual awakening in young Marines who had yet to face combat. Not glorifying war, never that, but helping them understand the deeper bonds that formed under fire, the responsibilities that extended long after the shooting stopped. Sullivan attended one of these sessions, observing from the back of the room with evident satisfaction. Afterward, he approached Morgan as Jason and Ryan helped gather his notes. "You've started something important here, Bill," Sullivan said. "Something that could have lasting impact." Morgan shrugged. "Just trying to help these young Marines understand what they're really part of. The history, the tradition, the responsibility." Sullivan nodded. "I've been thinking about formalizing this, making it part of the regular training cycle. The Morgan program has a nice ring to it." Morgan shook his head firmly. "No, if you're going to do that, call it the Williams program, or better yet, the Fallujah Legacy program. This isn't about me." Sullivan smiled, always deflecting recognition. "Some things never change. Some things shouldn't," Morgan replied. December arrived with unseasonable warmth, as if winter itself were holding back out of respect for the events unfolding at Fort Harrison. Morgan continued his treatments, continued his talks with young Marines, and continued to be surprised by each additional day granted to him. On a particularly mild Saturday morning, Morgan sat on his front porch drinking coffee from his Marine Corps mug, Rusty dozing at his feet. The flag on his porch now flew at full staff, a change he had made the day after the Veterans Day ceremony. Sarah would understand. A familiar Humvee approached, parking at the curb. Jason and Ryan emerged dressed in civilian clothes rather than uniforms. It was their day off, Morgan knew, which made their appearance unexpected. "Morning, Gunny," Jason called as they approached the porch. "Wilson, Martinez." Morgan nodded in greeting. "What brings you here on a Saturday? Shouldn't you be enjoying your liberty?" The two exchanged glances before Ryan answered. "Actually, Gunny, we were hoping you might help us with something." Morgan raised an eyebrow. "What kind of something?" "A project," Jason explained, "for the Williams program. Colonel Sullivan approved it yesterday." Morgan noted the name change with quiet satisfaction. "What kind of project?" Ryan stepped forward, holding a digital recorder. "We want to document the stories of Marines like you. First-person accounts from different conflicts. Desert Storm, Iraq, Afghanistan. Create an oral history archive for training purposes. And we wanted to start with you," Jason added. "Your experiences in Fallujah, if you're willing." Morgan considered the request. He had never been one to tell war stories, had always maintained that what happened in combat was private, something shared only with those who had been there. But perhaps there was value in breaking that silence, in ensuring that lessons learned at such cost weren't lost to time. Not just combat, Morgan stipulated after a moment. If we're going to do this, we do it right. The whole picture, what it means to serve, what it means to come home, what it means to live with the memories. Jason nodded eagerly. That's exactly what we were hoping for, Gunny. Morgan gestured to the porch chairs. Sit down then. Might as well get started. For the next 3 hours, Morgan spoke into the recorder, telling his story with a candor he had rarely allowed himself. He talked about joining the Marines as a young man seeking direction, about the camaraderie that had become the defining feature of his military experience, about the challenges of reintegrating into civilian life after combat deployments. And finally about Fallujah, about the radio call for help, about the decision to respond despite the risks, about Jake Williams's final moments. He knew he wasn't going to make it, Morgan said, his voice steady despite the painful memory. Too much blood loss. But he held on long enough to make me promise about the flag. His grandfather's flag that he'd brought for luck. Make sure it gets home, he said. Those were his last words. Jason and Ryan remained silent, understanding the sacred nature of what was being shared. I kept that flag for 20 years, Morgan continued. Kept it safe, kept it ready for the day when I could fulfill that promise properly. And now it's where it belongs. Ryan stopped the recorder. Thank you, Gunny. This is exactly what the program needs. Real experiences, real emotions, real lessons. Morgan nodded, feeling strangely unburdened by having shared what he had kept private for so long. Who else are you planning to interview? Colonel Sullivan provided a list of veterans in the area, Jason said. Different conflicts, different experiences. We're hoping to build a comprehensive archive. Good, Morgan approved. Make sure you include some of the less glamorous stories too. Supply clerks, mechanics, cooks. They served just as honorably even if they didn't see direct combat. We will, Ryan promised. As they prepared to leave, Jason hesitated. Gunny, there's something else. Colonel Sullivan asked us to invite you to the Marine Corps birthday ball next week. It's a special one. They're dedicating part of the ceremony to the Williams program. Morgan hadn't attended a birthday ball in decades. The formal celebration of the Corps' founding on November 10, 1775, was a hallowed tradition, but he had always felt it belonged to those still on active duty. I don't know, he began. Colonel Sullivan specifically requested your presence, Ryan added. Said it wouldn't be right without you there. Morgan sighed. Tell the colonel I'll be there. After they left, Morgan remained on the porch reflecting on the unexpected turn his life had taken. 3 months ago, he had received a terminal diagnosis and focused solely on fulfilling his promise to Jake before time ran out. Now here he was involved in a new program that might impact Marines for years to come, tending formal functions, sharing stories he had kept private for decades. All because he had persisted after being turned away at the gate that morning. All because Sullivan had recognized his name and remembered. Sometimes, Morgan mused, the most important missions were the ones you didn't know you were undertaking until they were already underway. The Marine Corps birthday ball was held in the grand ballroom of the Jefferson Hotel in Richmond, an ornate venue befitting the occasion's dignity. Morgan arrived in a taxi, having declined Sullivan's offer of military transportation. He wore his best suit with his Bronze Star and newly acquired Gunnery Sergeant insignia properly displayed. A young corporal greeted him at the entrance. Gunnery Sergeant Morgan, Colonel Sullivan asked me to escort you to your table, sir. Morgan followed the corporal through the crowded ballroom, nodding acknowledgement to the many Marines who recognized him. His brief moment in the spotlight at the Veterans Day ceremony had apparently made him something of a celebrity within the base community. Sullivan was waiting at a table near the front of the room, along with David Sullivan and several other officers. Jason and Ryan stood nearby in their dress blues, apparently assigned to a ceremonial detail for the evening. Bill Sullivan greeted him warmly. Glad you could make it. You remember my son David, of course, and this is General Armstrong from Marine Corps headquarters. Morgan shook hands with each man, noting the general's appraising look. Gunnery Sergeant Morgan, Armstrong said, I've heard a great deal about you recently. Your story has made quite an impression at headquarters. Morgan nodded politely. Thank you, sir. The Williams program is generating significant interest. Armstrong continued. We're considering implementing it Corps-wide, a valuable addition to our training protocols. The young men deserve to hear from those who went before, Morgan said simply. Good and bad, truth, not just recruiting poster stories. Armstrong smiled. Exactly the perspective we need. Sullivan mentioned you've been quite candid in your sessions with the newer Marines. No point in anything else, sir. The conversation was interrupted as the Master of Ceremonies called the formal proceedings to order. The traditional elements of a Marine Corps birthday ball followed the entrance of the colors, the Commandant's birthday message, the ceremonial cutting of the cake with a Mameluke sword. When the formal portion concluded and dinner was served, Sullivan leaned toward Morgan. There's one more item on the program tonight. Something we added specially. Morgan raised an eyebrow questioningly, but Sullivan merely smiled and returned to his meal. After dinner, the Master of Ceremonies returned to the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special presentation this evening. As many of you know, Fort Harrison has recently established the Williams Program, an initiative to connect our newer Marines with the experiences and wisdom of those who have served in combat. Colonel Sullivan will now tell you more about this important addition to our training protocols. Sullivan rose and took the podium. Thank you. The Williams Program is named for Lance Corporal Jake Williams, who gave his life in Fallujah in 2004 while protecting his fellow Marines. But it might never have come into being without the actions of another Marine Gunnery Sergeant, William Morgan. Morgan shifted uncomfortably in his seat as attention turned his way. Sullivan continued recounting the story now familiar to many in the room: Morgan's initial rejection at the gate, the subsequent recognition in the Veterans Day ceremony. What began as a simple desire to find a proper home for a fallen comrade's flag has evolved into a program that we believe will benefit Marines for generations to come. A screen descended behind Sullivan and a video began to play. Morgan was startled to see his own face recorded during one of his sessions with the young Marines. Being a Marine isn't about the uniform, video Morgan was saying. It's not about the medals or the recognition. It's about a promise you make to your country, to the Corps, and most importantly, to the Marine beside you. A promise that doesn't end when you take off the uniform. The video continued with excerpts from other veterans who had been interviewed for the program, interspersed with reactions from young Marines who had participated in the sessions. When it concluded, Sullivan returned to the podium. The Williams Program officially launches Corps-wide next month. We've already recorded over 50 veterans sharing their experiences, creating an invaluable resource for our newest Marines. He gestured toward Morgan. None of this would have happened without Gunnery Sergeant Morgan's persistence, courage, and willingness to share difficult truths. And so it is my honor tonight to present him with this token of our appreciation. An aide stepped forward, carrying a wooden plaque. Sullivan accepted it and moved to stand before Morgan, who had risen automatically at the approach of a senior officer. Gunnery Sergeant William Morgan, Sullivan read from the plaque, in recognition of extraordinary contributions to Marine Corps training and heritage. Your dedication ensures that the lessons of the past will guide the Marines of the future. Semper Fidelis. Morgan accepted the plaque, momentarily at a loss for words. Finally, he managed, "Thank you, Colonel. But this recognition belongs to all the veterans who have shared their stories, and to the young Marines who have been willing to listen and learn." Sullivan smiled. "Always deflecting, Gunny, but not this time. This one is yours." As Morgan returned to his seat, applause filled the ballroom. He glanced at the plaque in his hands, still struggling to reconcile the events of the past months with the quiet retirement he had envisioned for himself. Life, it seemed, had other plans. The remainder of the evening passed pleasantly as dinner gave way to dancing and more informal socializing. Morgan found himself approached by Marines of all ranks, many expressing appreciation for his contributions to the Williams Program. Near the evening's end, Jason and Ryan made their way to his table during a brief moment when he was alone. "Evening, Gunny," Jason greeted him. "Enjoying the ball." "More than I expected to," Morgan admitted, "though I've had about enough socializing to last me the next decade." The young Marines laughed. "We wanted to show you something," Ryan said, producing a small box, something we had made for the Williams Program. Inside the box was a challenge coin larger and more substantial than the standard military coins exchanged as tokens of recognition and respect. One side bore an engraved image of a Marine in combat gear helping a wounded comrade. The other side showed the Marine Corps emblem with the words "The Williams Program" and "Honoring our legacy, forging our future" encircling it. "We had 100 of them," Jason explained, "one for each veteran who contributes to the program, and one for each Marine who completes the special training module." Morgan turned the coin in his fingers, admiring the craftsmanship. Well done, Jake would approve. The first one belongs to you, Gunny, Ryan said. As the program's founder, whether you'll admit it or not. Morgan started to protest but stopped himself. Sometimes he realized accepting recognition was its own form of service, acknowledging not personal achievement, but the importance of the mission itself. Thank you, he said instead, slipping the coin into his pocket. I'll carry it with honor. As the evening concluded, Morgan found himself standing outside the hotel with Sullivan, waiting for the valet to bring the colonel's car. The night air was cool, but not unpleasant stars visible despite the city lights. Need a ride home? Sullivan offered. Morgan shook his head. Already called a taxi. Should be here any minute. He hesitated, then added, Thank you for tonight, James, for everything, really. Sullivan smiled at the rare use of his first name. You're welcome, Bill, though in truth I'm the one who should be thanking you. For saving my son's life all those years ago. For bringing Jake's flag home. For helping us create something that will benefit the Corps for years to come. Just doing my duty, Morgan said. As a Marine. As a Marine, Sullivan echoed. Semper Fi, Gunny. Semper Fi, Colonel. As Sullivan's car pulled away and Morgan waited for his taxi, he reflected on the strange journey that had brought him to this moment. What had begun as a simple desire to fulfill a promise made to a dying Marine had evolved into something far more significant, a program that would connect generations of Marines, ensuring that hard-won lessons weren't lost to time. Jake Williams' flag was now properly honored. Bill Morgan's service was now properly recognized. And most importantly, the legacy of sacrifice and duty that defined the Marine Corps would continue passed from one generation to the next through the stories of those who had lived it. The taxi arrived and Morgan climbed in, giving his address to the driver. As they pulled away from the hotel, he touched his pocket where the new challenge coin rested alongside the one he had carried for decades. Two symbols of service, of promises kept, of missions completed. The taxi passed the entrance to Fort Harrison, where it had all begun with a rejection at the gate. The sentries stood at attention in their dress blues, the base secure under their watch. Morgan nodded in their direction, acknowledging their duty, even though they couldn't see him through the taxi's windows. Tomorrow would bring another treatment session at the medical center, another opportunity to share his experiences with young Marines, another day in this unexpected extension of service that fate had granted him. Morgan wasn't sure how many such tomorrows remained. The doctors remained cautiously optimistic, but he maintained his own pragmatic assessment of his condition. However many days he had, he would use them well. The mission continued, different than before but no less important. As the taxi turned onto his street, Morgan saw his house in the distance, the porch light he had left on, creating a small beacon in the darkness. The American flag on his porch was illuminated by a spotlight visible even at night, now flying at full staff as it would remain. Home. Not the end of his journey as he had once believed, but simply another waypoint, another beginning. The taxi stopped in front of the house and Morgan paid the driver before making his way up the walkway. Rusty would be waiting inside, loyal as always. Tomorrow would come soon enough with all its obligations and opportunities. For now, though, in this quiet moment between one day and the next, William Morgan allowed himself to feel something he hadn't experienced in a very long time. A sense of completion, of purpose, fulfilled, of peace, well earned. The flag had found its home, and so at last had he.